Hello everybody, my name is Neostrike and welcome back to Daring Do and the Marked Thief of Marapore. Chapter 6. Enter the jungle. Warm winds rushed through Daring Do's gray and black mane as she zipped across the late morning sky, legs outstretched, reaching toward her destiny. It had been a rough flight from the inn, but she'd flown straight there with no stops. She couldn't waste any more precious time with silly matters like rest. There would be no helping ponies if they were already eternally frozen in volcanic ash and cinders. Daring Do applauded herself for her impeccable sense of direction and fast flying as Mount Vehoovius came into view. As she soared through the atmosphere toward the behemoth, Daring Do felt like the wind had been knocked from her lungs. Vehoovius was the largest volcano she'd ever seen. It reached far up into the clouds, kissing the blue sky. The blackened, sloping sides had formed deep grooves from the repeated expulsions of hot, molten lava throughout the millions of years of its existence. Patches of green foliage creeping up the wide base of the formation were a dead giveaway that it had been several years since its last eruption. That meant she had made it in time. She still had a fighting chance of finding the relics and returning them to their rightful places before any disaster struck. The volcano was beautiful yet daunting. Daring Do wondered how the ponies of the region had managed to build their towns here with such an imminent threat dictating their entire lives. There were no other towns or cities for hundreds of miles in any direction. Back at the inn, Mrs. Trotsworth had explained that the citizens of the Tricorner villages were so remote from every pony else that they created their own fully functional society. The three towns were each in charge of a major resource, and they shared their bounty with one another. The residents of Ponypeii were the farmers. The ponies of Lusitano lived near the river, and thus provided fresh water. And those who lived in Marapore were the masters of the loom, providing the distinctive cloaks of the region. The ponies of Marapore's talents were rumored to be entirely in their creation of the special garments which tourists to the region coveted. Some ponies said that the cloaks were magical and gave the wearer unique powers. Derry wasn't sure what she believed, but a well-traveled voyager such as herself had seen many far-fetched things. Temples crumbling to the ground in 3 seconds flat, natives shooting 100 poison-tipped arrows at her as she weaved through the forest, and massive boulders chasing her down narrow underground passageways. Whatever the truth was about the mysterious villagers, all signs pointed to Marapore as the place to start looking for it. Daring tilted her body, soaring through the low-hanging clouds and pursuing the gradient of rich greens below for the ideal place to touch down. She wanted to land just outside of Marapore, so that she could get a hold of her bearings before entering the town. If any pony had noticed her prematurely, she might have to explain herself. Sometimes the quickest way to ruin a mission was to make it known to the public. Questions demand answers. The scene seemed to be accurate to the map she'd obtained in her Atlas of Equestria. The base of Mount Vehoovius was surrounded by a thick tropical foliage, a blanket of deep greens, fiery reds, and rich purples. A worn path connecting the three towns forged a visible triangle from the sky, with a staggering mountain rising up from the center. Along the side of one of the villages was a sparkling turquoise river, which meant it must be Lusitano. Daring flapped her wings harder, circling around to make way to the next village. A colored patchwork of crop fields implied that the land belonged to the farmers of Ponypeii. Daring flew on toward the final point of the triangle. As she came in closer, she could make out a tiny grid of clay cottages with green and beige thatched roofs. Definitely Marapore, Daring thought, recalling an illustration on the wall at the Get-On Inn. A surge of excitement rushed through Daring's body. It wouldn't be long until she would find this shadowy, cloaked pony and have him lead her to the priceless Flankara Relics. This quest was extremely dangerous, but she was up for the challenge. Daring dived down into the hot jungle just outside the town. She spread her golden wings, landing gracefully next to a group of wide-trunked palm trees. Their long green fronds swayed gently in the light breeze, which offered the only relief from the tropical atmosphere. It was a stunning scene, if stifling heat and impending, fiery doom was your sort of thing. The scent from the native hibiscus flowers was so strong that she could almost see it. Daring breathed in the sweet, intoxicating air, and then remembered what she had read about the vegetation in this part of the world. Thousands of breeds of exotic flowers were common here, especially somnambular blooms. She gathered one of the massive fuchsia flowers in her hoof and checked out the stem to make sure it wasn't orange. If so, she'd be asleep in moments, even though she would look like she was awake. It would be pointless to sleepwalk through her whole adventure, not to mention dangerous. Luckily, the stem was just a harmless, pleasing shade of purple. Daring Do took another hearty whiff and let the freshness fill her lungs. A bead of sweat dripped down her face, and a lock of black mane clung to the nape of her neck. Daring removed her pith helmet and stashed it in a patch of ferns and bushes with lavender leaves as big as her body. It was far too humid for headwear at the moment, plus it drew too much attention. For now, blending in was of utmost importance. There were several identifiable landmarks, including a glistening aqua pond and 3 palms of exactly the same height in a row. She checked the roots to make sure that they weren't wanderers, and whipped out a piece of chalk from her shirt pocket. A scribbled X on the middle tree would suffice. The sound of a white feathered ghost macaw echoed through the trees. The great bird spread its frosted wings and whooshed past Daring Do. Was that a warning? Or a welcome? No matter, it didn't deter her. She was here to do a job, and nothing would stand in her way. Not even the deadliest tropical bird known to pony kind. What do we have here? Daring mumbled to herself, inspecting a set of large hoofprints in the dried mud. There were 2 straight lines on either side, the impressions from many carts traveling through. It was part of the trade route she had seen from above. The pony dug into her brown satchel and pulled out a light silver hooded robe. It was the closest thing to a Marapore cloak she'd been able to find in her closet back home. With any luck, the disguise would allow her to do some investigating without getting noticed as a foreigner. Urban camouflage was an art. Daring found it even more of a challenge than hiding away in a bunch of plants. This time, she was also a Pegasus in a mainly Earth pony territory. She would have to keep her wings in tight for the time being. A low hiss came from the bushes. Daring Do froze in her tracks. Jungles were vast, treacherous places with plenty of nooks and crannies for deadly creatures to hide in. Daring Do had more than once found herself being trailed by a predator or 2. The culprit was revealed when a gigantic green snake slithered under hoof. The sun shone through the treetops in shafts, glinting onto the creature's shiny scales. However, the snake seemed entirely uninterested in the pony adventurer. He disappeared into the foliage with another hiss as punctuation. Daring Do continued on, hooves patting quietly against the dried mud and fallen palm frond-covered ground. She was starting to think she'd miscalculated her proximity to the town when muffled sounds of many ponies gathered in one place rumbled through the trees. Perfect, she'd thought. A crowd is the best place to go unnoticed. Philly-ho! She said to herself as she forged ahead, picking up the pace into a full gallop. Dust and fern leaves rustled under her hooves as she ran, speeding ahead toward what appeared to be a sunny clearing. She only realized her mistake when it was almost too late. She was heading straight over a cliff. The village was directly below, about 40 feet down. Her hooves came to a screeching halt beneath her, trying to gain purchase on the leafy ground. Whoa! She called out as she extended her wings as a reflex. She flapped them gently and backed herself away from the edge. Her cloak had fallen back from her face and away from her wings. Daring was completely exposed. Every pony stopped the rhythmic chanting she had overheard and looked up at her. Their eyes, which were still wet with tears, now grew wide with awe.
The golden prophesized Pegasus!
A tall blue pony in a magenta cloak cried out.
We're saved!
So much for an inconspicuous entrance. End of Chapter 6. I'm Neostrike, and I'll see you all next time for Chapter 7.